This is Criteria.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras. I'm here with my co-host James Majewski. Hey James.
That's me.
We are back to start another director of filmography series. We did all of the films of Terrence Malick recently, and we're going to be returning now to a director who we covered a bit in the Vatican Film List. So Andrei Tarkovsky, the great Russian director. We did Andrei Rublev and The Sacrifice from the Vatican Film List, his second and his last films, respectively. And I think all three of us, you, me, and Nathan Douglas, all voted Andrei Rublev as our favorite from the Vatican Film List, right?
Yeah.
So Tarkovsky is a very significant director, but also a very significant director in terms of spiritual themes, religious themes, especially as seen in Andrei Rublev and The Sacrifice. And we're going to be looking at the rest of his filmography, which is a total of 7 films. So we've really got 5 films to go. And we're starting today with Ivan's Childhood from 1962, which was his first, feature film. He had a couple of short films from, student projects and things like that, which you can see. But this is his first feature. He set the test for himself to find out whether he deserved to be a filmmaker, essentially.
With this movie.
Yeah. He talks about this in his book, Sculpting in Time, which is a wonderful read. I've just started reading through it. And this film is based on a novella. The project had already been in development at the Mosfilm studio, but then it was put on hold and then given to him. So he got the chance to make a studio in the studio system, I think at a time when it was kind of hard to get in. There were only so many projects going around. So the screenplay was written by the author of the novella, co-written by him, and then it was reworked significantly by Tarkovsky, along with Andrei Konchalovsky, who also co-wrote Andrei Rublev. And you may remember we discussed Konchalovsky's movie Sin about Michelangelo.
Oh, yeah.
That he directed much, much more recently, like in the past decade.
Interesting.
So he directed that movie and he co-wrote these first 2 films by Tarkovsky.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they were like friends and collaborators. Actually, I believe that the way that they found the actor who plays Ivan, Nikolai Burlyayev, or however you pronounce it, I'm not sure, was that he had been in maybe a student film or a short film by Konchalovsky.
I see.
Before that. So it stars the same boy actor who, if any of you have seen Andrei Rublev, and if not, definitely watch it. He plays the boy in the second to last segment with the young bellmaker. Is the main character, or the actor plays the main character in this film, Ivan's Childhood. In many ways, this is an interesting film in his career because it's his first film, and you can kind of tell that it is, not in the sense that it's amateurish or anything like that, but in the sense that much as when you watch Terrence Malick's Badlands or something like that, you see the seeds of his style, but elements that are more conventional. It's definitely his most conventional and accessible film. But, it's still a fairly unconventional film.
Sure. Yeah, and I feel like you can see him trying out a lot of the things that are going to be developed more forcefully in subsequent films, both thematically and cinematically.
Yeah, so early in Sculpting in Time, which is a great book to read along with this series because it gives his kind of philosophy about cinema, but it does so hitting his films in chronological order along the way. He talks about his goal in making the film, and he wanted to find out if he had it in him to be a director. And he says, quote, "In order to come to a definite conclusion, I left the reins slack, as it were. I tried not to hold myself back." And then he goes on, "All this is not to say that I made the film as a kind of unstructured exercise, merely that I tried not to hold myself back. I found myself having to rely on my own taste and have faith in the competence of my aesthetic choices.
That's awesome.
On the basis of making the film, I had to establish what I could count upon in future work and what would not stand the test. Now, of course, I hold different views on many things. Afterwards, it became clear that little of what I discovered actually had life in it, and I have since abandoned many of the conclusions I reached then."
Wow.
Which is pretty interesting. I mean, it's a very conscious way to go into this.
Yeah, totally.
Because he's not even talking about proving himself in a career sense so much as do I have valid ideas as a filmmaker?
Yeah, so I wonder what he means by the things that he jettisoned later. If he's talking about sort of concrete takeaways, with regards to filmmaking, or more on a personal level, what kinds of impulses he was really valuing or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess maybe he'll talk about that more as I get through the book. But but he does mention a couple of scenes that he felt didn't work because of decisions made for the sake of efficiency, where like his personal, like he wasn't personally excited by what was on the screen. I think an example he gives of that is the dialogue between Ivan. I mean, we'll get to this. The argument between Ivan and the captain about whether he's going to be sent to military school or not. That even though the performance is interesting and the character is interesting, just something about the way that it's done is too commonplace for him or something. It wasn't like touching him at his like aesthetic core.
Yeah, well, I feel like that's one of the things that's so striking about the film right from the beginning, is that it begins with this amazing sequence. First, a kind of dream-like sequence where we're introduced to Ivan,
right,
in a sort of like idyllic fantasy childhood, and then the stark juxtaposition of the reality of his circumstances, being behind enemy lines in war-torn Russia or whatever front line they're on, and there's so much about the juxtaposition of those two elements that kind of like comes out and grabs you cinematically, so the opening shot is a really beautiful shot with Ivan framed against a tree. The camera moves slowly up the tree as Ivan exits the frame and then re-enters the frame further down the field. At a certain point, he sees a butterfly, and then the camera almost begins to take on the energy of this butterfly as it lifts him from the ground, and he's soaring above the hills. And it's a really exhilarating sequence. The camera really doesn't stop moving even after he's landed, down on the shore front. But then when he wakes from this dream in like a windmill in this very barren landscape, the contrast in the landscape is striking, but then also reflected in the way the camera is working. Very interesting and hard angles. At one point, the camera is like looking up at him, and you have this windmill, dominating the shot in the above the frame, and it takes what was a kind of dreamlike sequence and turns it into a kind of nightmarish sequence. Very static camera, not the kind of free movement. And of course, in the performance of this actor, we're immediately, with very few words, shown just how different this Ivan is. We got this picture of the idyllic Ivan, the innocent Ivan, and now we see this grizzled, rugged and broken Ivan. Yeah.
So it's a movie about like a childhood destroyed by war.
But what I was getting at was that, that's all accomplished in just the first few minutes, and so it's so striking that you're watching a real auteur, that you're seeing someone who has a real command for the form. And then, before long, you're treated to some of these more boilerplate sequences of people just, a scene playing out, people having conversations, trying to figure out what's going on. And so it's interesting for that reason.
Which are perfectly good sequences.
Yes.
As like that you wouldn't say that this is boring. You wouldn't say away from, this is such a cliche.
No.
So what, insofar as he ended up unsatisfied with some of them, not all of them by any means, I think it's more because of the sort of the poetic dimension that he's trying to stay in touch with at all times, even in such sequences.
It's even interesting, like that scene that you pointed to, where they're speaking with the colonel about Ivan going off to military school. It does have some nice touches to it. There's a cool framing of the colonel's face, his like hard resolute face in the foreground of the shot.
In terms of mise en scène and all that kind of
Yes,
stuff.
and then even at the end, the camera pans down and goes to the window frame, and the window almost like melts away into a scene of what's happening outside with troop movements and the like.
He mentioned that the aspect of life that he felt remained in that was the people doing work like below the window outside.
Yeah, cool. Cool.
But yeah, maybe should we just explain a little bit more what the movie's about? Or,
oh yeah, sure. I guess so. I mean, I guess yeah, we should mention a synopsis. But I think it's worth illustrating from the outset that part of like the real draw of this film for me is just how much of a kind of like masterclass this film is on a lot of more poetic touches in filmmaking without it by any means like drawing undue attention to itself or being or seeming too self-aware,
right?
Or not like incongruent with the story that the film is trying to tell,
right?
So what is that story?
Yeah, well, okay, so this is a war movie, right? So he's working in a genre. I don't know how many of his films you can really say that of. I think, I guess Stalker is technically sci-fi, but you'd hardly call it a genre sci-fi film. Solaris maybe a little bit closer. You can say Andrei Rublev is a historical epic, but he's really doing his own thing with that. But in this case, so it's a war film that takes place. You don't actually see any fighting, any battles. It takes place in the time in between missions, essentially, and the sort of the tension and the planning, and the reflection that occurs in that time. So in a sense, it's more about the oppressive atmosphere of war and the fallout of war than the war itself. So Ivan is this little boy, and we see him in the dream sequence. We see his mother in the beginning, and then he's woken up by I think the sound of a gunshot, and we see that he's in this war-torn landscape, as you mentioned, and then he crosses a river, and then we find out essentially that he is a scout for the military, that he's this, old beyond his years from war, this, I don't remember how old he's supposed to be, 10, 12, something like that.
Yeah.
And he's being used as on reconnaissance missions, from this outpost in territory that's very close to German occupied territory.
Yeah, it seems to be a kind of front line between the Soviets and Germany during World War II,
or maybe German occupying parts of Russia, something like that.
Sure. Yeah, it's never really explained to us, but it's right where the two armies are kind of at a bit of a deadlock across this river. And then two other main characters that we're introduced to are the young commander, Galtsev, I think is his name. He's the commander at this particular outpost. And then someone who seemingly is like one rank above him, Colin. He's also a soldier in some sort of authority capacity.
Right.
It's all very unclear.
Yeah, that's right.
But these three figures kind of remain the three primary characters that we follow in one way or another. Yeah. There are some other supplemental characters, like we mentioned, the older colonel, who really only appears at the beginning with the threat of sending Ivan off to military school. And then there's one kind of odd character, Katasonich, who's kind of a lower lieutenant, but seemingly older than both Galtsev and Colin.
He's the most likable character.
Yeah, he's a little eccentric. He spends much of the film fixing a phonograph. But the reason I mentioned those three characters in particular, aside from them sort of like taking a lot of the focus through the film, is that I think that there's a clear kind of parallel that runs through the three of them. Ivan, of course, at the beginning, we're just struck by, one, how young this child is, and two, how like, yeah, hardened beyond his years he seems. When he's first brought into the commander, who doesn't know anything of Ivan or of these missions that Ivan has been sent on, it's Ivan who's commanding him to phone the colonel and tell him that he's back, you know? And so we, at that point, don't know who Ivan is. You know,
I didn't know if he was bluffing or not at the beginning, you know?
I didn't know if maybe he was like some like lost czarist, you know, heir or something like that. Because he has this air of authority about him that comes off as very natural. And so it's kind of an amazing device because it draws us into the story right away. We are just as confused as this young commander is about who on earth this kid is, you know? But the one thing we do know is that this kid definitely does not act his age. He seems to have been thrown, whether by necessity or whatever circumstances, into a kind of situation that's required him to really like man up in a sense. But then Gotsev too is also kind of strikingly young. He's younger than the foot soldier that comes in and introduces Ivan. He seems he gives you the impression of someone who maybe, you know, went through officer school and only like just came out and now is in charge. And and so right away there's this kind of parallel between the two of them of like, these both seem like men who young, you know, in one case a child, and in the other case a young man who should really be off doing other things than waging war. But then, of course, once Ivan's identity is determined, and the colonel gets word, the first thing he does is send Holin to greet Ivan. And with this introduction of Holin, we see another kind of disparity or something, because he rushes in. It's the first time we see this grizzled Ivan smile and happy. They embrace, and it's really like a father reuniting with his son. And
he so, like picks him up, he sweeps him off his feet,
exactly,
kissing him on the cheek.
And so here too, there's a kind of dissonance because this man is not his father. This man is not in a position to really be a father right now. And so we see another, you know, if not young man, you know, only slightly older than the commander, who, because of war, is really, you know, having to like put a lot of other things aside that he might otherwise be engaged in, you know, and being fulfilled by. So that's kind of the connective tissue that I see among these three characters. The film's called Ivan's Childhood, and certainly Ivan is like the most prominent character, and we really are concerned from the beginning to the end about this kid's childhood. But it's these two other characters, Gotsev and Holin, that I think also illustrate this theme of like what war deprives a generation of men of, you know. And part of the real interest of the film is seeing how the three of them kind of navigate that and interact with one another, you know.
I mean, I like that scene also because it introduces both when Colleen comes in, it introduces both the sort of the camaraderie that he has as like, because it's like two fellow soldiers reuniting in the sense that Ivan has been off on a dangerous mission of reconnaissance, right? And he's like really glad to see him. But it's also like it reminds us that he is a child, and that like the fellow soldiers think of him both as a comrade and a child somewhat at the same time. There is still the child in him, and you see this in various ways just in how he reacts to things emotionally, you know. So it's I mean, it's amazing performance by Nikolai Burlyayev, because
the kid who plays Ivan.
Because I mean, it's very similar in a way to the character he plays in Andrei Rublev, this precocious boy who has to grow beyond his years. And because in Andrei Rublev, his father was the bell maker. His father died. There's been a plague, I think. And he has to do this on his own. And similarly here, we see this defiant quality, this defiant quality of he has to prove himself and assert himself, because they're treating him as a comrade, but also as a child.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to send him off to military school. That's not his, any kind of peacetime life is not his world anymore. It's not just a question of where he is and what he's doing. It's like that. He's been changed to like a wartime person.
Yeah,
for
sure.
For lack of a better term.
For sure. At one point, he rebukes the commander Galtsev, who says throughout the film they're all kind of trying to get Ivan to leave the front, go to the rear, perhaps go to military school. And I forget what line it is exactly that prompts this rebuke from Ivan, but he tells
him to go off and rest, right?
Yes, right.
And then Ivan says, "You know who rests in times of war? Useless people," or something like that.
But he also says, "Have you seen the death camps?"
Yes.
And the commander, has to say no. And he says, well, what are you doing then talking to me about this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really does come off as like, someone who's really speaking out of like a deep wound and a kind of, a real brokenness and this drive for vengeance, but also a kind of seriousness, like, listen, I've seen probably worse than you've seen, So what are you doing talking to me about going off and resting or something?
Yes.
War is man's business is a line that this commander says a few times,
It's implied that, we're told that it's not just that he, lost his family and then came straight to this company. It's like he's already had a lifetime of experiences behind him. It says that before he was with the official military, he was with multiple different partisan groups, so how long a period of time this has been, I don't know, but now it's implied that he's been to or in a death camp as well. Yeah. And so it gives us more perspective on the fact that like he's already kind of seen it all. Yeah.
And what's kind of amazing about this performance is that he's able to render both this, gritty Ivan as well as the innocent Ivan in the dream sequences or the flashbacks. Without a hint of irony. Yeah. These are fully realized representations, and so much so that like in the more idyllic sequences, you kind of can't help but find yourself smiling, or just like enjoying them, So it really does a lot of work in the film that he's able to do both of these things, and that we're able to experience both of these things, because then it becomes even more like it jumps out to us even more when we get flashes of that, even in present day reality. Ivan, I was trying to track like the number of times we see him smile in like the real life sequences, and I think it was only a couple of times that one initial meeting with Colin coming back, that being reunited there, but then also pulling out Galtsev's knife. Yes. And just being like kind of amazed by this knife, but it's like a childlike amazement at like a new toy, and he immediately asks him like, can I have it? And that's an interesting moment too, because you can see that Galtsev would like to give it to him, but he can't, because as he explains, that belonged to a buddy of mine who got killed. So it's now that I'm thinking about it, it's such a great moment because it sort of signals to us how, even for this young man, one of his closest friends has already died. Yeah. Right. And that this knife is what remains. Yeah. And so, and actually shortly afterwards, Katasonic, in seeing Ivan, so happy with this knife, tells him, tomorrow I'll get you one like that. Yeah. With the implication being that like during the offensive tomorrow, I'll kill a German and I'll get a knife like that, no problem, you know? So it's like this dark kind of perversion of what would otherwise be like a very normal kind of like domestic circumstance, you know?
Well, the next time we see Ivan smile is not in a joyful way. It's the smirk that he has on his face when he's alone in the room and sort of playing or simulating or training himself for his act of vengeance.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is my favorite scene in the film. Now, there are so many awesome sequences in this film, especially the sort of more surrealistic portions that often are contextualized within, you know, a definite kind of like dream that's happening or a kind of fantasy. But this one is really interesting because it begins with him playing make-believe.
Yeah. So I want to say that, I mean, on both of these points, this is a scene that blends both the child and the traumatized young man,
and it
blends the dream and the reality.
Yes,
it's like the scene where these things come together.
Yeah,
we see both his, like, you could say he's almost playing at first, right? Like he's sneaking around on the floor and like any child would do, playing like soldier or
you
spy.
can hear this voiceover dialogue that's going on that he's speaking to himself, presumably in his head, you know. But then it takes kind of a nightmarish turn, and it's kind of the what begins as childlike imagination and reenactment becomes a kind of like playing out of trauma, you know. And so it's an awesome portion of the film because, again, we really see Tarkovsky going like full tilt on using all of the levers that he can pull to convey this cinematically. I mean, one of the first things that Ivan does is turn off all the lights and make it really dark, you know, ostensibly to like support the imaginative play. But then that becomes a device that Tarkovsky is able to play with where the light is focused and how figures are coming in and out of the darkness and how the camera is moving. It's really quite amazing because if I'm not mistaken, it has this montage like quality, but it's not only because it's cut or edited in a montage like way. It's actually like a montage that's also being accomplished by the way the camera is focusing and moving into light and out of light. And that's something that's true of a lot of the sequences through the film, is that there's a real choreographic sense with the camera, because he's not just nailing the framing, but he'll send the camera to follow the actors to move and hit positions where it's clear, you know, he would have had to have coached the actors ahead of time to hit these spots and know where the camera is going to line up. One example that stands out to me is the scene between Colin and Masha. Masha is this young nurse, this young medical assistant assigned with the regiment or whatever this battalion is. Apologies for my, ignorance of military terminology. But anyway, there's this very interesting kind of like cat and mouse sequence with the two of them in the woods together, walking together. And Colleen is like kind of, flirting with her and sort of progressively and like more aggressively kind of making his intentions clearer to her. But the dance with the camera and the way Tarkovsky has worked with the actors to hit certain visual moments is very illustrative of this tendency throughout the film of just really kind of knowing how to almost like edit the scene in the shooting. You know what I mean?
My favorite bit in the scene we were just talking about with him enacting this revenge against the enemy is just the part where he's standing there ringing the bell frantically. Because he sets this bell up in the beginning of the scene, which again reminds me of his character in Andrei Rublev. But and I'm wondering what you make of the whole the presence of this bell. But at the end of the scene, he just, at this climax of, you start to hear sounds coming in from elsewhere and voices, and almost like there's been I don't know, you start to see shots. Don't you see shots of people like imprisoned in a room? You people who are waiting to be shot or something like that.
There's been something scribbled on the wall.
Right. But then you also see he's like him in a room with a woman, probably his mother.
Yeah.
And so there's more and more information coming in, especially through sound, and like there's a battle about to happen or something's about to happen, and then you just see him like ringing this bell like an alarm, and just the expression on his face is very striking. This kind of, it's like this nightmare expression of I don't know how to describe it, but it's like, yeah, I don't know, panic, okay. it comes off like he's like, help, is the expression on his face.
Yeah.
It's very, very striking. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned the scene with Masha, and I mean that gives us a chance to talk about the use of landscape.
Yeah,
obviously, frequently a big feature in Tarkovsky's films. I mean, there's a number of visual motifs you'll see, like shallow water, used in a lot of his films. But the forest, the birch forest, where this scene takes place between the Colin and Masha, is very striking. These white skeletal birches, and there's really nothing else. It's just rows and rows of these birches. It's interesting the way that Tarkovsky uses these landscapes, because when we talk about things that are less conventional in this film, that have maybe less immediately to do with the narrative, it's not just the dream sequences, which we'll talk about more, but also like these long shots in landscapes, particularly the birch forest and the river.
Yeah.
The sort of shallow river with all the trees in it, which is, many of the shots of that don't have any people in it at all, you know, and the only human activity we see is like the shooting of flares to light it up. But this is something that Tarkovsky also talks about in Sculpting in Time, that one of his convictions that he developed had to do with the personal connection of the filmmaker to the material. And he felt that if a certain landscape or setting evokes memories or associations for the filmmaker that are very powerful, then that excitement will somehow be communicated to the audience. And so likewise, his use of his own memories, he said one of his earliest memories is like telling his mother, "Oh, there's a cuckoo," which is like the first line in the film, you know, mom, there's a cuckoo. And so he has this faith in, if I have a personal connection to this, that will somehow come across to the audience. In the early chapters of the book, there's a lot about like how everything, all of the elements of the film to be authentic need to be sort of filtered through the subjectivity of the artist.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's very interesting. And he says, unless there is an organic link between the subjective impressions of the author and his objective representation of reality, he will not achieve even superficial credibility, let alone authenticity and inner truth.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, because that suggests to me like a real confidence in the power of these impressions.
Yeah.
And in sort of like the mystery of created reality. Because,
yes,
you know, the temptation for the artist can be to, you know, want to exert mastery over material and just sort of like understand how everything's functioning and why it's functioning and to what end it's functioning, you know, and it's true, you know, a filmmaker of Tarkovsky's caliber has to have that, but to really transcend that and to get to what he's talking about here about like authenticity and inner truth, I think you need to have like a certain reverence for the mystery of the power of images and impressions and of things and people, I don't know what his connection to these birch trees is, for instance, this landscape.
Right.
But it's clear to me that there's a potency there, that there's a value there,
right.
And perhaps that value is something that ends up being interpreted differently for me.
Yes.
It's not necessary that I understand what it means for Tarkovsky, or that there be a one-to-one connection between what it means for him and what it means for me. But I can say that it's very evocative of something, I can talk about what it's evocative of to me.
Yeah.
But I think that there's like a real kind of like humility and confidence in this sort of poetic dimension to things.
Yeah.
That resides kind of like outside of the filmmaker's control,
Yeah.
But that it's something that he's alert to subjectively.
Yeah, but at the same time, for him, it happens to the audience because it has happened to the filmmaker.
Well,
but
yeah,
but it's not necessarily that they're taking the same thing away from it. In other words, like he's not in control of the what exactly the effect is or how they might interpret it intellectually.
Yeah.
But like in order to get to the audience's like subjectivity, it has to pass through the filmmaker's subjectivity, something like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's cool. And maybe I'm disagreeing with him on some, subtle level, but like I wonder if it's not that there is a potency in the thing itself that the artist's subjectivity recognizes.
Yes.
And that
I think he would agree with that.
And it's not that I had this connection with this thing, therefore there's a value.
Okay.
It's that I had this connection, this impression, and so I need to like honor that in the work that I do. That by accessing that, it's going to give my work a whole other level to it.
Right.
That is going to go past a superficial credibility,
I think he thinks this value is there in the things, but also that it becomes transformed into a work of art and not just sort of a documentary by passing through the subjectivity.
Yeah. So
and
basically
that it takes on its like organic value within the work as a whole.
Basically, he's talking like a poet. You know what I mean?
Yes,
like that to me is just describing the dynamic of poetry.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it also touches on how he approaches adaptation. He has some thoughts early in the book on what works can and can't be adapted, and I don't know that I totally agree with them, but I think some of what he says holds true in general, even if not like in principle. He doesn't want film to be a copy of literature, because if you just take what's on the page and try to put it on the screen, aside from any number of problems with that approach, it's not passing through you on the way to that. So like he has to truly adapt it to like himself as an artist. And so I think he actually found it useful to be working with a story that in many ways he said did not move him actually as a work of literature, but he saw the potential of a film in it. Whereas he seems to think that a masterpiece, like that, nobody who actually valued film or literature would ever try to adapt an actual masterpiece.
Yeah.
Which I don't know that I fully agree with.
Sure.
But I understand what he's getting at there.
Sure.
Because it already has because the masterpiece is already like so suffused with the artist's personality in that particular medium.
Yeah.
But this also he uses the language of poetic links. So he wants film to move further away from literature and other adjacent art forms. And in the part of the book where he's discussing Ivan's childhood, he talks about that he's not interested in sort of the logical plot development of a novel or like a stage play or something like that. That he's looking instead for poetic links. Not that there can't be any plot development, but that he's not interested in having this sort of like preordained schema of logical plot development that the film has to fit into. You don't look at this film and say it's illogical, but
well, the plot in this film is actually pretty thin. You know,
it's not illogical, but it's not.
No,
it's
it's
heavy
really
on
not.
plot.
It's not the focus. You know, it's there might be other films that have like a very riveting plot that keeps you on the edge of your seat, but this one is, what is it? Ivan comes back from a mission. He kind of almost gets sent to military school, doesn't apparently, and then goes off on another mission.
The scenario is very interesting. Like the scenario is riveting in the sense that like this character and the situation he's in, like you were saying at the very beginning of the film, we're drawn into. But then like what happens is not really.
No, I mean nothing really
focus.
happens.
Yeah.
You know, it's mainly a character piece. It's about these three men and their interactions with one another and with some of the other people around them.
Right, and you know he also talks about with landscapes that. The landscape, even when the character isn't in the frame, in his view, the landscape and the dream sequences and stuff, they tell you something about the character's inner world.
Yeah.
Like just the landscapes, even in the scenes where Ivan isn't present.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting. And the poetic links thing also can, so this is what I was trying to say about moving away from literature, is that it's not only that he's not interested in focusing heavily on plot, but he also doesn't like a literary approach to symbol. Like this is an image that you haven't, that you can have like you can find the intellectual like interpretation of.
Right.
And so that seems to be a bit of a distinction with when how he uses images versus how another filmmaker, maybe even like Kieślowski or somebody might use like a potent image.
Right.
It's that Tarkovsky, there's something a bit more mysterious in Tarkovsky and not something that can be sort of abstracted. He's trying to convey something that's alive. That's a big part of his, I know that's very vague, but he's trying to convey something that has like an organic life to it on the screen and to be in touch with reality in a way that is not neatly interpretable.
Yeah.
I mean, this film is the easiest to sort of most accessible version of that in his filmography. Later films, you'll see that he goes in a really radical direction with that. But this is also for the sake of the audience, because he says he believes like it's a part of respect for the audience. So he says the method whereby the artist obliges the audience to build the separate parts into a whole and to think on further than has been stated, as in stated explicitly in the film, is the only one that puts the audience on a par with the artist in their perception of the film.
Yeah.
So there's this aspect of like, I don't want to try to like say everything and say all that. Yeah. Say it all explicitly. And it's not even just that like there's this particular implication that is the subtext that he wants somebody to get out of it. It's like the actual irreducible thing that he's showing you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, the bell that is hung up at this one moment, that doesn't like necessarily map on neatly to, or like readily lend itself to a kind of interpretive lens. Yeah. But there are all sorts of other moments like that. And it's interesting because they can get sort of more or less distant from the like the action of the scene. Right. So like one image that jumps out to me is when they've finally, they're coming back from depositing Ivan back on the other end of this river for his final, mission. On their way back, they get the bodies of two men who had been killed on a previous mission. And they're kind of, wrapped up together. The bodies, that is.
Sitting upright in the boat.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's a very strange picture. Yeah. Because it's these two guys, rowing this dead body. It looks like a single body, but we know it's two that are, sitting in the kind of like pride of place of this rowboat. So it's very, it has like these kinds of allusions to like crossing the river Styx or something like that, or that painting in the Met with like Death Island or whatever it is. You know what I'm talking about? Island of the Dead. But But it also means that I think he's really sensitive to when something does have, when an image does have, you know, a very clear eloquence. So like one of my favorite little moments is when Kolin and Goltsev and Ivan are getting ready to go on this final mission. Final in the sense of like, that's the last one we see before the movie ends.
Yes.
And Kolin is preparing like rations for them. He's putting like little bits of bread and food together in a bag, and there's a handgun on the table in the shot together as he's essentially packing a lunch for Ivan. And there's like this moment when Kolin kind of like hesitates and like looks up, and you can see that there's something going on interiorly. And again, like the film sort of leaves it very loose. You know, you don't know what this moment is, but like that picture of making a lunch, you know, for your little boy who's going to go off on this dangerous mission, you know, there's an example of some objects and some images that have this great eloquence that the filmmaker has to be aware of, but that are like more proximate or more, you know, immediately legible for the action of the scene. Right. But it doesn't in any way like diminish that there are these other images that are equally powerful, but operating in a looser way. You know,
I mean, the bell is just the bell is very psychologically potent.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, in the book he uses the word like affective. You know, like affective. You know, like he's looking for like the audience to draw like emotional and associative connections rather than like symbolic in the literary sense. Obviously, symbolism is something that exists in these films.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mentioned the opening sequence of the very first shot of Ivan against the tree and then the camera panning up it. Well, then like a few moments later, he's coming, when we're back in reality, he's coming into the frame and the camera's panning down a dead tree as he's approaching it. So it's like this total inversion. So he's very sensitive there to like a very literal kind of symbolic movement and image,
and also that he's like running in this this like idyllic open space, and then like suddenly like running, it's about to collide with a dead tree at the end. I mean, should we talk a little bit more about the dreams? We haven't really talked about their anything about them specifically other than the first one. They change as it goes on. You know, the first one is almost like, I mean, there's the flying part, but it almost mostly feels like a memory. We've got we don't need to detail all of them. One of the most interesting ones is the second to last one, where Ivan is, and I don't remember where exactly in the plot this occurs, but Ivan is riding on a truck, an apple truck, with this young girl in the rain. The trees are it's like there's like a storm, and the trees are kind of shot like in negative, and he keeps offering her apples, and it keeps like panning around to him offering an apple to her, and her having like a different facial expression each time, and it grows more like somber. I particularly like the scene where at the end of this dream where the horses are drawing this truck on this beach, and the apples are just all spilling out onto the beach, and there are other horses like eating the apples, and it's just like this perfect image of like peacetime abundance, and it's a very striking image because I mean it's not one that we've seen before. Actually, Tarkovsky says that somebody like wrote to him saying or made a comment to him like, I like your film because everybody shows us horses eating hay and oats, and you showed us like a horse eating apples or something like that. You know, that's like it's like a new image. It's not just like the stock.
Yeah, well, and it's
material.
also, you know, it's like even in the eating, like if it was just one apple, we would see a horse, you know, devouring every last bit of this one apple. Right. But instead we see this horse taking like a bite of an apple here, a bite of an apple there. It's like such abundance that like he can just take a fresh bite of a fresh apple every time. I mean, you know, one thing I wanted to mention was the sound design.
Yes,
that
awesome.
There's just an incredible sensitivity to we've talked a lot about his sensitivity to the power of images, but here he really, really demonstrates a clear sensitivity to the power of sound.
Yes.
And even like very subtle sounds. So throughout the film, there are all sorts of
bird sounds,
ambient sounds that really affect you as the viewer watching this scene. Yeah. So at the beginning, like you mentioned, the
cuckoo.
I've been hearing the cuckoo,
which starts during like the studio logo.
Yes, right, yeah. right. But there's other things.
There's woodpecker noises in the birch forest.
Yep, that's right.
There's a lot of creaking in some scenes, like creaking wood.
Yeah, when he goes when he runs away because he thinks they're going to send him to military school, he's in this kind of like ruined landscape, and he comes across this kind of eccentric old man going through the ruins of his home looking for something. And throughout that sequence, there's this creaking door that's being blown by the wind, but then also in all the sequences back at the commander's quarters, back at HQ, there's dripping water. There's always dripping water. It's almost like you're in like a sewer or something, you know? And so all of these sounds, they really like, aside from lending like a real texture to the sort of, the felt reality of the scene, there's a kind of like psychological, effect that they end up having, and a kind of tension that's created. But then certainly there are more like bombastic illustrations of the use of sound, literally with like flares and bombs and explosions. But like you mentioned in that sequence with the bell and the playing the make-believe and all these sort of nightmarish voices that come together in this kind of cacophony, this is a huge part of what makes the film as effective as it is,
Yeah. And the music is good. It's as far as I remember, the most emotionally, this film is in many ways his most like emotionally direct film, and that's true, very true of the music. Like of all of his films, it's the only one that I could remember so many moments where like the music is telling me what to feel, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but just in a more typical film score way. Right.
Well, the phonograph, probably is the one thing that gets the closest to being like a more traditional symbol, I suppose. I don't know exactly what of, but like it's like.
Well, it's a song about Masha.
Yeah,
and the character's name is Masha.
right. Right.
Yeah. And it's telling her to like go away or something, and then she goes away.
Well, maybe before we finish talking about this, like one of the things I would like to come back to is how I see these characters as all being connected thematically, and it's because Masha is relevant. I think that one of the things that unites them is this, like the presence of this woman or of the woman. In the case of Ivan, it's definitely his mother.
Yeah.
But we see that there's a kind of like romantic tension between Goltsev and his young assistant that seems like it's actually a lot more plausible. Like you could imagine that maybe once the war is over, these two, they might get together, But then later, as I mentioned already, there's definitely this sequence of real sexual tension between Colin and Masha as well. And so we get a kind of like a love triangle dynamic that emerges there.
Goltsev handles it very deftly by just sending her away from the front.
Yes, and I think that's
protects
relevant.
Her innocence.
I think it's relevant because it's not the only time that Goltsev tries to do this. He tries to also get Ivan to go to the rear, and in both instances, he says, that war is a man's business, and so that's what I want to like key into for just a moment, because. If we look at Ivan, and then Goltsev, who's only a few years older than him, and then Colin, who's only a few years older than him, and then perhaps even the Colonel, who's really only a few years older than Colin, we see like kind of mapped out that these all may as well just be Ivan. Like this could be like a trajectory that Ivan's on. When Goltsev is talking to him about military school, you get the thought, well, perhaps this guy went to military school,
Yeah. And what do we see at the end of the film? I don't want to spoil the ending, but we do see Goltsev with like some new scars on his face at the end of the film.
Mirror almost exactly the scars that Colin has.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and Colin even acknowledges this. I'm losing my train of thought. Kind of what I want to get at is that it seems to me that as the men get older, their willingness to instrumentalize Ivan becomes like easier. And that like Goltsev being like sort of the most proximate to Ivan's youth is the most resistant to it. But that the warmth that Ivan receives from Colin being like so different from the coldness that he gets from the colonel, it to me, it just sort of illustrates that like there's a kind of lost innocence that compounds, and that Colin himself even seems to acknowledge this at one point when he says that, well, Goltsev is kind of like, really like saying to him, like, why don't you adopt him, And Colin kind of dismisses it, saying, well, the colonel says that I could use some bringing up myself, and it's kind of tongue in cheek, but I think it actually like nods to something that's very, very real about like a kind of thwarted or like stunted development in the person of this man who really like otherwise might be marrying and fathering children and, packing a lunch in a way that's not, so distorted. But so too, like with this relationship with Masha or this, it's really quite tragic. Like that sequence among the birch trees takes on kind of like a sinister tone.
Predatory.
Yeah. But it's when we see Masha at the end, when she comes to say goodbye before being sent to the hospital, there's this real sadness in Colin who perhaps recognizes that like this will never be for him, and so I think that like as much as the film is about Ivan and his childhood or his lost childhood, it seems to me to be more broadly about what everybody sacrifices, especially these men, during a time of war being a man's business, so to speak. And then, at the end of the film, we get these like insane, seemingly real documentary, clips of the aftermath of the Soviets taking Berlin and discovering all these top Nazi officers who had not only killed themselves but also killed their families.
Right.
So that montage, because it's more than one, oddly, it reminded me a little bit of the montage that takes place at the end of Andrei Rublev, because there are these like very intense images that don't seemingly, immediately bear any like obvious relevance to the film that we just watched.
Right.
But that somehow the film that we just watched has prepared us to see this image and have it work on us in a different way. Like the monstrosity of these men who sacrificed their families. It's like we've somehow kind of keyed in to that phenomenon through our experience of these characters and their desires and their, weakness and their wounds, it seems to me I'd be interested to know if that's sort of like thematically where the novella is operating, but it definitely seems to me like this is where Tarkovsky wants to be operating, and it's kind of, I think you could say like almost like if at any point this was meant to be like a propaganda film, for Russia, for the Soviets in World War II, fighting these like monstrous Germans, it like totally it's an anti-war film too, and it really kind of points back as well to what's going on in our own people, during these times. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. I mean, when I saw that the shot of the men in the ruined building with the swastika hanging over, I'm like, oh, this is probably the most regime approved a Tarkovsky film could have ever been.
Yes.
You know, because it's like I didn't expect us to suddenly cut to the Russian victory.
Yes.
You know. But I like what you're saying about the thematic resonance there, because at first it's a little jarring. It's like, oh, it's like this could have been. I wouldn't have expected Tarkovsky to do something like so like plotty as like take us to the end of the war or something.
Right. But it's you know, again, I don't really know the circumstances of how this film was made, but you can kind of, I get the impression that, you know, some censor or something watching this would be like, oh great, yeah, Russia wins and like the Germans are monsters and this is good, you know. But that the quieter, more artistic kind of critique is about, you know, what happens to humanity,
right,
including our own,
right,
you know, in time of war.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Can I read one more quote from Tarkovsky?
Sure.
This is not about this movie in particular, but I think it's a great one for Catholic artists to hear. It's a really great. In setting great store by the subjective view of the artist and his personal perception of the world, however, I am not making a plea for an arbitrary or an anarchic approach. It is a question of worldview, of ideals and moral ends. Masterpieces are born of the artist's struggle to express his ethical ideals. Indeed, his concepts and his sensibilities are informed by those ideals. If he loves life, has an overwhelming need to know it, change it, try to make it better. In short, if he aims to cooperate in enhancing the value of life, then there is no danger in the fact that the picture of reality will have passed through a filter of his subjective concepts, through his states of mind. For his work will always be a spiritual endeavor which aspires to make man more perfect, an image of the world that captivates us by its harmony of feeling and thought, its nobility and restraint. As I see it, then, if you stand on firm moral ground, there is no need to shy away from greater freedom in your choice of means.
That's great.
So it's kind of like a love and do what you will
honestly,
approach to aesthetics.
Everybody needs to hear that, not just Catholic artists.
Yeah. But I love that he bases it like if you
maybe
are
supporters of Catholic art.
If you're approaching things with a morally upright intent and like essentially to like, I mean, he talks about enhancing life, but like you could say glorify God, you're free to explore things aesthetically. Yeah. So I like that quote a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
The next film in his filmography is Andrei Rublev, and we've already discussed that. And I would recommend, if you haven't heard our episode on that, go back and listen to that. Or maybe if you want to be reminded, you know, about that film, go watch it again. If you want to follow us through this filmography. So the next film by Tarkovsky we will discuss will be, I believe, Solaris, which is a science fiction film. We're not doing these all back to back. We're doing them like we did Malick. Like every few episodes, we'll do a Tarkovsky film. Yeah. And so I would guess that we'll cover these 5 films over the next like year and a half or something. You know, given our current release schedule. So the next episode, James, you're going to be in Poland for a couple weeks.
Indeed.
With a theater group.
Mm-hmm.
And the next episode, Nathan and I are planning on reviewing Christopher Nolan's soon-to-be-released film of The Odyssey. So that's coming out, you know, a little bit out after this episode will come out. So that'll be the next episode, and then we'll come back with something else with James probably in August. All right. Well, thank you, James.
Yep.
Thank you, Tarkovsky. Thank you, Toshiro Mifune and our Austrian actors. And thank you, listeners. And if you'd like to help us out, I would suggest going to catholicculture.org/donate/audio to support all of our podcast productions. Thanks, everybody. God bless you. See you next time.
Criteria is a production of catholicculture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including church history podcasts Way of the Fathers and Lives of the Popes, Catholic Culture audiobooks, and our long-form interview show, the Catholic Culture Podcast. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical year resources, and more at catholicculture.org.